Every Roblox game has a shop system. Today, I'm going to show you how to create a shop just like Grow a Garden. By the end of this video, you'll be able to implement a shop just like Grow a Garden with a global restock timer and global stock. All right, so I'm here in a new Roblox place and let's get started. So first, what we're going to want to do is add our shop asset. So we're going to come into workspace and I just found the stand in the toolbox. So I'm going to copy it and paste it into here, and you can make the stand whatever you want. The only important thing is when we come into our NPC, we have an attachment, and in the attachment we have a proximity prompt. And in the proximity prompt, we have the tag window, and then we have an attribute. Here, I'll show you guys how to add this. We have a string attribute, also called window, and then we set the window string attribute to be shop, and we also want to make sure we name the proximity prompt shop. All right, now that we have our stand set, we're going to want to come into replicated storage, and we're going to want to add 4 folders. So we have 1, and then we're going to duplicate this 3 more times, and then we're going to want to name these folders bindable events, and then we're going to want to name remote events, and then we're going to want to name this one remote functions. And then this one will be our models folder. This will hold all of our fruit models. So in bindable events now, we're going to want to add a bindable event, of course. And this bindable event is going to be called purchase item. And then in our remote events folder, we're going to add a remote event, and we're going to name this remote event stock shop. And then in our remote functions, we're going to add a remote function, and we're going to name this buy item. And then in our models, I just have a couple example models also pulled from the toolbox that I'm going to paste into here. So these are just going to be the fruits for the example of this video. Great. Now that we have replicated storage done, we're going to move into server script service. And it's just pretty simple. We're just going to add a server script, and we're going to name this server script shop. And then we're going to add a child to this shop script, and we're going to add a module script, and we're going to name this script ShopManager. And then in ShopManager, we're going to add 2 more module scripts, and this one is going to be named library, and this one is going to be named ShopDataStoreHandler. And that's the server script service done. And then we're going to jump down to starter player, and then in starter player scripts, we're going to add 2 local scripts. So there's 1, there's 2, and the first one is going to be called populate shop, and then the second one is going to be called setup. And then in setup, we're going to add another module script, and this module script is going to be called setup functions, just like that. And with that is all the scripts we'll need. Now, with all that being said, we're going to add our GUI elements. So I've gone ahead and left a link in the description where you can download this Roblox asset, and then you can just paste this into your starter GUI, just like this. With that is our Explorer done. Now we have to move on to coding. All right, first things first, we're going to come into the shop server script we made and delete the print hello world. And we're going to define players equals game get service players, of course. And then we're going to define the shop manager. Shop manager equals require script dot shop manager. And then we're going to say shop manager dot init. And then we're going to say shop manager dot start heartbeat. And then this is going to be on when the player joins. We're going to say players dot player added, not player removing, player added, connect. And then we're going to connect that to a function, and then that's going to pass the player through it. And then we're going to say shop manager dot player added, and then we're going to pass the player through that as well. And then we can copy this entire thing and paste it right below. And instead of player joins, we can say player leaves, and then change player added to player removing. And then same with this, player removing. And that is this server script done. Now we'll move on to the shop manager module script. All right, this is our first module script we'll be doing, which is kind of long, so let's get started. So first we're going to change this module equals bracket to shop manager, and then we're going to copy that and place that here, give us some room, and now we have to define a bunch of services. So we're going to define players again. Players equals game get service players, and then we're going to define our replicated storage equals game get service replicated storage. Then we're going to define our run service. So run service equals game get service. Run service. And then we're going to define our marketplace service. Marketplace service equals game get service marketplace service. And then we're going to define our messaging service. my goodness, messaging service. And then we're going to define some of our remote event and functions. So we're going to say stock shop equals replicated storage dot remote events dot stock shop. And then we're going to define a buy item equals replicated storage dot remote functions dot buy item. Great. Now we're going to define our shop store handler, and we're going to require the script dot shop store handler. And then we're going to also define our library. So in this case, it's going to be our fruit library, and that's going to also be require script dot library. And then for later, we'll add a library into there. So we'll say on the outside of this parenthesis, we'll say dot library. And then we're going to define our player stock. So player shop stock equals empty table. And then this is going to be our restock time. So for now, we'll set this to 20. So this will be in seconds. And then we're going to set local timer equals restock time. And then we're going to say local last update equals os.clock. And then we're going to define a shared shop data. So shared shop data equals empty table. And then we're going to define our original shop data. That also equals empty table. Now we're going to define all the rarity rules. So local rarity rules equals empty table. And then we'll open it down. And then I'm going to copy and paste this because it makes it easy for me. But this just has all your rarities. So common, uncommon, rare, epic, legendary, mythical, divine, prismatic. And then this opens up a function and returns a random number when we call it. And this random number is going to be the stock of that item. And then under that, we're going to set our first function, which is going to be local function set stock. And this is going to be given the fruit data. And then we can say local rule equals rarity rules. And then we're going to pass in fruit data dot rarity. Don't worry about the fruit data. We will get to that. And then we're going to return the rule and then the rule function and then or 0. So if nothing's returned, then we're going to still return 0. And then we're going to make a new function, local function, and we're going to sync the player stock. And then we're going to pass in the player, and then we're also going to pass in the stock data. And then we're going to say local user ID equals player dot user ID. Simple as that. And then we're going to say player shop stock user ID, so this is how we store it, equals empty table. And then we're going to define it, so for underscore comma item in pairs stock shop do. Editor Grayson here, I just want to let you know this is supposed to be stock data and not stock shop. It's going to loop for everything in the stock shop, and we're going to say player stock shop, player shop stock, my bad, user ID, and then item dot name equals item.stock. So now we're going to set the player's individual stock to the current global stock. And then we're going to run stock shop fire client. And then we're going to fire to the player we want, the stock data, and then the timer. So then the client can sync up with the server. And then we're going to come below that and we're going to make another function. So local function, clone shop data. And we're going to pass in the source. And we're going to say local clone equals empty table, and then for underscore comma item in ipairs source do, and we're going to say table dot insert clone and then table dot clone item, and then we're going to come out of this loop and return the clone. So this just clones the stock. Now we're going to make another function again, and this is going to be called stock shop, and we won't pass anything into this. And then this will just stock the shop. So we're going to print stocking so we know what the program's doing. And we're going to say local new stock equals empty table. Then we're going to say for base ID and then the fruit data in pairs fruit library, which we defined up above. What we're going to do is do. And we're going to say fruit data dot stock equals set stock according to the fruit data, and then we're going to say fruit data dot name equals the base ID, and then we're going to insert this into a table, new stock, and then the fruit data, and then we're going to come out of that loop and we're going to say shared shop data equals table dot clone new stock, and then we're going to say ShopStoreHandler, and then we're going to set the shop data to the shared shop data in the timer, and then we're going to make a pcall function. So pcall function, and then we're going to do a messaging service, public async, global shop restock, and then the os.time. And so this will notify everyone that the shop is restocking, and then we're going to say original shop data equals the clone shop data with the shared shop data. Now we want to reset the player stock. So I'll add a little note here. So reset each player's personal stock. And then we're going to say for underscore comma player in iPairs players get players do sync player stock and then the player with the shared shop data. And then that is the stock shop function done. Next, we're going to come in here and make a global function called ShopManager dot start heartbeat. And this is the heartbeat countdown. So we're going to do run service start heartbeat connect, and then we're going to connect it to a function, and we're going to say local now equals os.clock, and then we're going to say local delta equals now minus last update, and then we're going to say last update equals now, and then we're going to say timer minus equals delta, and we're going to say if timer is less than or equal to 0, then timer equals restock time, and then we're going to stock the shop. That should be lowercase s because we want to call this function here. Now we want to load the shared data from the data store. So when player joins, pretty much local function load shared shop from data store, and we're going to say local saved shop equals ShopStoreHandler, and then we're going to call the get shop data, and we're going to say if save shop and save shop dot shop data, so we're just making sure it exists. Then we're going to say shared shop data equals table dot clone the save shop dot shop data, and then we're going to say timer equals save shop dot timer or the restock time. Then we're going to say original shop data equals clone shop data and then the shared shop data. I'm going to say for underscore comma player in iPairs, in iPairs players get players do, and then we're going to sync the player stock to the player again, and then the shared shop data. When it is initialized, everyone will get the same shop data. Now we're going to make another global function, ShopManager.init. So this is the initialize function. Make sure that's caps. And I'm going to say local saved shop equals ShopStoreHandler get shop data. I'm going to say if shop data and save shop dot shop data. Then we're going to load that shared data from data store. And if we don't have that, we're going to say else. Then we're going to stock the shop. So this is like on first join pretty much. And then we're going to do a pcall function, and then we're going to do messaging service, subscribe async, and then we're going to also say global shop restock. And then we're going to pass the function through with the message, and then we're going to load shared shop data from store. That's good. And now we're going to come in here and make another function, shop manager dot player added, and then we're going to pass in the player, and we know this is a player. Then we're going to say player shop stock, and then player dot user ID equals an empty table. Then we're going to say for underscore comma item in iPairs shared shop data do player shop stock, and then player dot user ID, and then the item dot name equals the item dot stock. So we're setting the stock here, and then we can get out of that, and then we can say stock shop fire client, and then we want to fire the player, the shop data, and then the timer. So that way on player join, they can sync with the server. And then we want to do another function for when they leave. So ShopManager.player removing, and then we're going to have the player. And then for this, we're just going to want to set it to nil so we don't have any memory links. So player shop stock player.userID equals nil. Now we're going to make a buy handler. So this is going to handle when the player buys stuff. So buy handler, I'm going to say buy item like we defined above, dot on server invoke. And this is going to equal a function. And we're going to get the player, and then we're also going to get the item name of the player, what they're trying to buy, and we're going to say local personal stock equals the player shop stock, and then their user ID, because that's how we store it. And we're going to say if not personal stock or personal stock item name equals nil. So if they don't have the personal stock, or if the stock equals nil, or if the personal stock item name is less than or equal to 0, meaning they have none left in the stock, we're going to say, we're going to first warm, and we're going to just say out of personal stock for this item name. And then we're going to return a table, and this table is going to be purchase success equals false. And then the message is going to be out of stock for, and then the item name. And then we can end. Then we're going to define the response here. And we're going to say for underscore comma item and I pairs shared shop data do if item name equals item name. Then look, it already knows that. Then we're going to say response dot item, or response equals item, sorry. And then we're going to break out, and then we're going to come down out of that and say if not response. Then we're going to warn and say we tried to buy something that doesn't exist, so non-existing item, and then we'll print out the item so we can see what that player was trying to buy if it doesn't exist, right? And then we can return nil. So this is just kind of like an anti-cheat if they try and buy something that doesn't exist. Okay, now after that we make sure that this item exists, we want to make sure the player has enough money, but that is beyond the scope of this video, so I'll give you guys an example, just an idea so you can implement it into your own game. So something I would do is I would have a payment manager. So if payment manager that balance of the player, and then if that is less than the response dot price, then I would warn and say the player dot name doesn't have enough money. And then I would return, you would return the purchase success equals false. So the client knows, with the message being not enough money or something like that, right? So you'd make a payment manager that checks the balance of the player, but we are not doing that in this video. So I will comment this out just to keep this here so you guys understand. So this would be check balance of player against price of item, and we get the price from the response. Response is defined up here, and it's taken from the shared shop data, which has the item's price within it, because we set the full response to the item's data. Next, we're going to process the purchase here, and we're going to set the personal stock of the item name to minus equals 1 because they bought 1, and then we're going to say response.stock equals personal stock of the item name. So we're just going to tell the client the new stock pretty much. And then here's going to be the logic to give the item to the player. So for example, we'll do give fruit, and we're going to give it to the player, and then we're going to tell the player the response. And then we're going to have another payment manager. So payment manager, subtract balance player, response.price. That's pretty good. Subtract balance, I name mine like take money. You can have it whatever. Now that the player was given and the money was taken, the purchase success was true. So we're going to say response.purchase success equals true. And then we're going to finally return the response, because this is, keep in mind, a remote function. So we have to return that data back to the client. Now, just for clarification, this is where we give the item to the player, and then this is where we take the money from the player's balance. So however you guys have that set up in your game, this is where you would add it in. But for the simplicity's sake of this tutorial, these payment processors and payments are not part of it. Now we're going to add one more function in the script and it should be done. So function ShopManager, and we're going to restock the player shop for the player, and then we're going to sync player stock, and then we're going to have the player and then the shared shop data. And then with that, that is the ShopManager complete. Now we have to move on to the library and the ShopDataStoreHandler. All right, now we're going to move into the library, and I've once again gone ahead and made a big library. I'm just going to paste that into here. You guys can look through this and copy it if you like, just to save me some time. I've just copied and pasted it. So we have apple, banana, strawberry, blueberry, dragon fruit, and then we have vegetables and some fungus and then some other veggies. But for the scope of this video, we have the price, we have the rarity, and then we have the Robux price. Now let's move on to ShopDataStoreHandler. All right, at the very top of the script, we're gonna set some services. So we're gonna say local DSS equals game get service, and this is the data store service. And then we're gonna say shop store is going to be the DSS get data store, and then this is going to be called persistent shop store. And then we're going to define the run service, so local run service equals game get service run service. And then we have the module, and then we're going to say function. We're going to say function module set shop data, and then we're going to have the data and then the timer, and then we're going to do a success pcall. So local success or error, and then this equals the pcall, which is a function, and then we're going to say shop store set async. And then we're going to set the shop, and then we're going to open up a table here. And then in the table, we have the shop data, which equals data. And then we have the timer, which equals the timer. And then we have the timestamp, which equals the current time, os.time. And then we have the elapsed time, which equals 0. And then we're going to come out of that. And then we're going to say if not success, then we're going to warn and say failed to save shop data. And then we're going to print out the error. And then we're going to come down and make another function, and this is going to be the get shop data. And then we're going to do another pcall function, just like it. And then in this one, we're going to say local shop data equals shop store get async of the shop. And then we're going to say if not shop data, then we're going to return nil. And we can put this all on one line just to make it easy. And then we're going to say local elapsed time equals the current OS time minus the shop data dot timestamp. And then we're going to say shop data dot timer equals math dot max 0 with the shop data dot timer minus elapsed time. Now we're going to save updated timer and timestamp. So we're going to say shop store, and then we're going to set the async of shop to this table, and this table is going to be shop data equals shop data dot shop data, and then it's going to be timer equals shop data dot timer, and then timestamp equals the os.time, and then the elapsed time equals elapsed time. And then that's that. And then we're going to return the shop data. And then we're going to say if success, then we're going to return the data. And then if that isn't a success, then we're going to say warn failed to load shop data. And then for debugging purposes, we will print out the data. And then we will return nil. And then that's it. That is the ShopDataStoreHandler module completed. Now with all of the server scripts done, we're going to move down into the local side. So we're going to first open up Populate Shop. And in Populate Shop, we're going to delete the hello world and do local user input service equals game get service user input service, of course. And then again, we're gonna get the art replicated storage, so game get service replicated storage, and then we're gonna get the players, get service players, and then we're gonna get the run service. And then we're gonna get the local player, so player equals players dot local player. Now I'm gonna define some of the GUI elements, so player GUI equals player dot player GUI, and then we're gonna get the shop frame, which equals player GUI, and then we'll wait for the child for the screen GUI dot shop, and then we'll get the shop scrolling frame, and that is the shop frame dot scrolling frame, and then we'll get the template, which is local template equals shop scrolling frame, wait for child template goal, restock timer equals shop frame, shop frame dot top, and then we're gonna wait for child the restock timer, and then local stock shop equals remote storage remote events dot stock shop, and then we want the purchase item equals remote storage bindable events, and then this is the purchase item event, and then we want the buy item function, which is in remote storage remote functions dot buy item. Now we're going to set the price, so we're going to make a function, local function, set price, and then we're going to pass in the label, the price, and the stock, and we say if stock is greater than 0 and label is a text label, then we're going to say label dot the text color is equal to color3.new 02550, so green because it's in stock, and then we're going to return the money value, so $sign dot price, and then we're going to add a else if here, else if label is a text label, but the stock is not greater than 0. We're going to say label text color color3new red, and then we're going to return no stock because it's out of stock, and then we're going to do another else if and say stock is greater than 0 and label is a text button. Then we're going to do label dot text color3 equals color3 not dot new, and then this will be white, and then we'll set the background color because this is a button, so label dot background color3 equals color3 dot new, and then I have this set green color, and then we can say for underscore comma UI stroke and I pairs label get children do. What did I type? Oh yeah, I need a parentheses here like that. There we go. And then we're going to say for UI stroke, if that is a UI stroke, then not for, if, sorry. If it is a UI stroke, then we're going to want to say UI stroke dot color equals color3 dot new, this slightly darker green color I have. And then we're going to end that, and then we're going to end out, and then we're going to return once again the $sign dot price, and then another else if the label is a text button, then we are going to say label dot text color3 equals color3 dot new white, and then we're going to say the label dot background color3 equals color3 dot new, and then it will be this grayish color, and then we'll say for underscore comma UI stroke in I pairs label get children do. If UI stroke is actually a UI stroke, then we're going to say UI stroke dot color equals color3 dot new, and then we're going to set it to a darker gray, and then we're going to end it, and then we're going to end out of here, and then we're going to return no stock. So that's the set price label. Now we have to set the viewport. So we'll make another function, local function, set up viewport, and then we're going to pass in the viewport frame, and this is a viewport frame, and then we're going to pass in the tool name, and then this is a string. So now we can say for underscore comma child in I pairs in the viewport frame get children do, and we can say if child is a tool, or child is a model, or child is a part, then we're going to destroy the child. Now we want to define a camera for the viewport frame, so local cam equals viewport frame, find first child of class, and we're going to try and find a camera, and if we can't, then we're going to say instance.new camera, cam.name, comma, cam.parent, comma, viewport frame dot current camera equals viewport camera, and then we'll add these in quotations, and then we're going to say viewport frame, comma, cam. So cam.name, cam.parent, and then viewport.current camera equals viewport camera, comma, viewport frame, comma, cam. That looks right. Yep. I'm going to come below that and say local original equals replicated storage dot models, and then we're going to find first child of the tool name, and then we're going to set a dummy variable, so local dummy. Now, if original, then dummy equals original clone, and then if not, we're going to say dummy equals instance.new part. So if we can't find it, then there'll be a part as a fallback. Now we're going to set the dummy size, so dummy.size equals a vector3.new, and then we'll just set it to 222, and then dummy.anchored equals true, and then dummy.parent equals the viewport frame, and then we're going to set this cameras.cframe equals a cframe.new, and then we're going to get the dummy position, and then we're going to add a vector3.new 111, so it's slightly offset, and then we're going to do dummy.position again. Now we're going to come down and set a bind once function, so local function bind once, and then we're going to pass into the button, and this will be a GUI button, and then an attribute, and this will be a string, and then we're going to pass in a callback, so just type this in, nil. Great. Now we can say if not button get attribute, and then that attribute, then we're going to say button dot mouse button one click, and then we're going to connect that to the callback, and then we're going to say button set attribute, and then we're going to set the attribute to true. This is basically making sure we only bind the button once, so we don't get a lot of fires on the same click. Cool. Now we have to create the shop button, so we're going to say local function create shop button based on the item data we passed through. So we're going to say local entry equals shop scrolling frame, find first child, and then we're going to find the item data.name, or we're going to find template clone. So if it exists, we're going to find it, and if it doesn't, we're going to clone it. Then we're going to say entry.name equals the item data.name, and then we're going to say entry.visible equals true, and then above that, we're going to say entry.parent equals the shop scrolling frame. Cool. Now we're going to have entry, and we're going to add the tag temp to it, and then entry once again, .info.rarity .text, and this is going to equal the item data.rarity, and then we're going to have the entry.info.title.text is going to equal the item data.name, and then we're going to have the entry.info once again, but the stock.text equals, now I like to do like an X, you know, so X, and then the item data.stock, and then it's going to say stock, so that's how much the stock is going to be. And then we'll have entry.info once again, but the cost this time, the cost.text equals set price, and then we're going to send in the entry.info.cost, and then the item data.price, and then the item data.stock. That will define the different buttons and stuff for that. Then we're going to define the cost button, local cost button equals the entry dot purchase frame dot cost, and then we're going to say cost button dot text equals set price, and then we're going to do the cost button again, and then the item data dot price, and then the item data dot stock, and then we're going to do cost button set attribute, and we're going to set the stock attribute to be the item data dot stock, and then we're going to say entry dot purchase frame dot robux dot text. To get the Roblox symbol, you can copy this right here. It's like a fake symbol, but there's a little Robux symbol in there. I'll have this entire line in the description, so you can just copy and paste that in so you get the little Robux symbol in the text frame. Now we want to set up the viewport, and that is going to be the entry.info.viewport frame, and then we're going to send in the item data.name. Great. Now we have to bind the buttons so they actually work. So we're going to call the bind once, and we're going to send in the cost button. And then we're going to say by connected, and then I'm going to pass in a function, and then if cost button get attribute stock, and if that stock is greater than 0, then we're going to say a local response equals by item, and then we're going to invoke the server of the item data.name. Now if response dot purchase success, then we're going to say purchase item, and then we're going to fire, and then we're going to fire with the response, and then we're going to print out successfully purchased, and then we're going to say what we purchased, response.name. Now we can come out of there, and we can do 2 more bind onces. This is for the purchase frame for Robux, so entry.purchaseframe.robux, and then this is going to be the Robux connected. This is also a function, and then for now we'll just have a print here that says purchasing with Robux, and then we'll say what they're purchasing with Robux, so item data.name. And then this is where you would add the dev product logic in your game, and then we can copy this, and then instead of .robux we'll do .gift, and then instead of Robux connected we'll do gift connected, and then this is where you would add the gift logic. So purchase, we would change this to gifting item.name. There we go. Now we're going to come out of this all the way, and we're going to define the rarity order. So rarity order, how you want it displayed in your shop. You know, just take all the rarities, and then you can just do it like this. So common will be first, uncommon second, rare, and it's just the order of how it will be displayed in your shop. Now we have to define how we're going to stock the shop. So function stock shop, and this is going to be based off the shop data, and we're just going to sort the shop data by rarity for first. So table.sort, and we're going to sort the shop data with a function a comma b, and then we're going to return the rarity order of a.rarity, and we're going to check that against the rarity order for b.rarity, and then that's good. And then we're going to sort through the entries, so for underscore comma item data in iPairs shop data do. Now we're going to create the shop button based on the item data, so that's good. Now we want to format the time, so local function format time, and we just have seconds, but this will turn it into minutes and whatever. So local minute equals math.for, and then we're going to do seconds divided by 60, and then we can do local seconds equals the remaining seconds modular 60, and then we're going to return the string as a formatted string in quotations, and then you can do %02d colon %02d, and then we are going to have minutes and then seconds. So this just formats it to look like a clock. And then we're going to define the current timer ID equals 0. And then we're going to say a function, which is update the restock timer based on the current time. And then we're going to say current timer ID plus equals 1, counting up every second. I'm going to say local this ID equals the current timer ID. And then we're going to spawn a task.spawn, and we're going to spawn a function. And we're going to say while time is greater than 0 and current timer ID equals this ID, do. And we're going to say restock timer dot text equals new fruit in, and then we're going to format the time based on the time, and then we're going to task.wait 1 second, and then after we wait we're going to say time minus equals 1 to count down, and then outside of that while we're going to say if current time ID equals this ID, then restock timer dot text say equal new fruit in 0. So once it comes down to 0, we're going to say new fruit in 0 seconds, and then it's going to run the restock. Great. Now we have to add a stock shop on client event. So stock shop dot on client event, and then we're going to connect that to a function. And in this function, we're going to pass the shop data as well as the time. And we're going to say if time, then we're going to update the restock time based on the time. And then we're going to stock shop based on the shop data. Simple as that. And then we have to add a purchase event, purchase item dot event, yep. And we're going to connect that to a function, and we're going to have the data in that function. And we're going to say local entry equals shop scrolling frame, find first child, and then that's going to be data.name. And then if not entry, then we're going to just return n, so we don't have any errors if it doesn't find it. And then we're going to say entry.info.stock.text equals x, data.stock, and then stock. And then again, entry.info.cost.text equals that set price function we made up there. And then we're going to send in the info.cost, and then the data.price, and then the data.stock. And then we're going to say local cost button equals entry.purchase-frame.cost, and then the cost button.text equals set price again, and then we send the cost button in, and then the data.price, this must be a capital, watch out for that, check your caps, and then data.stock, and then we're going to say cost button once again, and we're going to set the attribute of the stock to be equal to the new data.stock. So when they buy it, it goes down by 1. And that should be the populate shop local script complete. Now with the populate shop complete, we have to go into the setup local script. And in the setup local script, we're going to define the workspace. So local workspace equals game, get service, workspace. We're going to define the players, game, get service, players, and then we're going to define the collection service, which equals game, get service, collection service. And then we're going to define the local players, so local player equals players.local player, and then the player GUI, which equals the local player.player GUI. And then we're going to define the setup functions, which is the child of this, so script.setupFunctions. And then we're going to wait 1 second for everything to initialize, and then we're going to print out saying loading setup. And then this is where we load in all the buttons and different objects within our game. So for_comma object and iPairs of the workspace get descendants do. And now we're going to check if the object is a proximity prompt. And if it is, we're going to check the tag we set. So local tag equals collection service has tag, and then that tag is the object. And then we're going to see if it's an action, and action or collection service has tag of the object is a window, and window or no. Now this is kind of complicated, but we're basically just checking everything within the workspace, and if it has a specific tag, if it's an action tag or a window tag, then we can go from there. Now we can say if tag, not task, if tag, then local key equals the object, and then get attribute, and then we want to get the tag attribute, and we can say if not key, then we're going to warn and say no, comma tag attribute set for, and then we'll print out the object. This is for debugging. And then else we want to continue, so we'll say local handler equals setup functions dot proximity prompt, and then we're going to say if type of handler equals a function, then we're going to handler the object. Otherwise, or else, we're going to print out the key with key. This is also debug, and then we're going to warn and say unknown or invalid tag, and then we're going to lower that with the key. This is some debug outputs just in case if you guys have any issues, this will help you out. So this will set up the proximity prompts, and now we basically have to do the same thing but for buttons instead. So actually we can just copy all of this and then come right below and set this, and where this says proximity prompt, we want to change this to GUI button, and then where this says local tag collection service, we're going to keep this the same, and then if tag then key equals object tag, if not key then no tag attribute set for this object, else we're going to say local action equals setup functions, and then we're going to pass in the key itself instead of directly going to proximity prompt, so we'll just see key like that. So, and then we're going to say if type of action equals function, then we're going to do the action of the object, and then we can keep this the same. Where it says iPairs workspace, change this to player GUI, not workspace. And then at the very bottom here, we're going to want to print out setup completed. And now we're going to come into the setup functions, which will be our last script. So let's come into setup functions. Now that we're in the setup functions, we can define some services here. Now to save time, I'm going to copy and paste the services. We're going to need the players, the tween service, replicated storage, and marketplace service. Great. Now we have that. Now we're going to define the local player. So local player equals players dot local player. And then we're going to define the player GUI equals from the local player dot player GUI. And then we're going to define the screen GUI, which is going to get another player GUI. And then we're going to wait for child screen GUI just in case. And then we're going to define the camera, local camera equals workplace dot current camera. And then we're going to add some UI elements here. So local blur equals instance.new, and then this is going to be a blur effect. And then we're going to say blur.size, and then we're going to say blur.enabled, and we're going to say blur.parent equals 12, and then we're going to say false, and then we're going to say camera. Then we're going to say local darken equals that screen GUI dot darken, and then we're going to say local shop frame equals the screen GUI dot shop, and then we're going to say shop frame dot visible equals false, and then we're going to define some constants here. So I'm going to say local tween info short equals a tween info dot new, and then we're set the time to be 0.1, and then we're going to say the enum that easing style is going to be quad, and then the enum dot direction is going to be out, and then we're going to do this again, but tween info long, this is going to be tween info dot new, and this is going to be half a second 0.5, and then we're going to say enum dot easing style, also quad, and then we're going to say enum dot easing direction is also going to be out, and then we're going to say local OG size equals udem to from scale 0.9 and then 0.25. And we're going to say local selected size equals udem to from scales and then 0.9, 0.42. And then we're going to say local dev underscore product underscore ID underscore restock equals, this is your dev product to restock the item. So I don't actually have a dev product because this is not released on Roblox, but this is where you would put the restock ID for the dev product. And then we're going to set the internal state. So we're going to say local currently selected equals nil because nothing is currently selected. And then we're going to say local setup equals open brackets. This is because it's a module script. And these are going to be some utility functions like the blur, the darken, the overlay, and stuff like that. So local function zoom blur, and then we're going to say blur.enabled equals not blur.enabled, so it'll toggle it. And then we're going to say local the target FOV equals blur.enabled and 60 or 70. And then we'll say tween service, and then we'll create a tween service with the camera. and then the tween info short we want to take, and then we want to edit the field of view, and that's going to equal the target FOV, and then we're going to play that. Now this is going to be the darken overlay, so local function darken overlay, and we say local new transparency equals darken dot background transparency is greater than or equal to 1 and 0.5 or 1, and then we're going to tween service create for darken. We're going to take tween info short again, and then open table, and we're going to say background transparency equals the new transparency. Oops. And then we're going to play that as well. Now we have to set up the proximity prompt. So we're going to say function setup dot proximity prompt, and then it's going to be passed in a prompt, and this is going to be a proximity prompt, of course, and we're going to say if not prompt is a proximity prompt, then we're going to return warn expected prox prompt. So it's just a warning, and then we're going to end out, so to avoid errors, and then we're going to say prompt.triggered. Then we're going to connect that to a function. That function is going to say local name equals the prompt, and we're going to get the attribute of the window, or if that's not there, we'll fall back on the prompt get attribute action, and then we can say local action equals name and setup name. And then if type of action equal to a function, then we're going to action it for the prompt. And then if not, then we're going to warn and say invalid setup action for the name, and then we're going to end. Now the proximity prompt is set up. Now we got to have a shop toggle. So we're going to say function setup shop, and then we're going to zoom blur, and then we're going to say shop frame dot visible equals not shop frame dot visible. So this is just a toggle, and then this is the dev product restock button. So we're going to say function setup dot restock for button. Is this a GUI button? And then if not button is a GUI button, then return, and we're going to warn and say expected GUI button. And then we're going to end again to avoid errors, and we're going to say button.mouse button one click, and we're going to connect this to a function, and we're going to print out say prompting shop restock purchase. And then this is where you would get the marketplace service, and then you would say prompt product purchase, and then we would prompt the local player, and then we would prompt that dev product ID that we set earlier. Now we have to define the close button, so we're going to say function setup.close, and that's going to be a button, GUI button, and then if not button is a GUI button, then we're going to return a warn saying expected GUI button, and then we're going to end out. Same thing, we can do button.mouse button one click, connect a function, and that's going to be local name equals button get attribute of the window. Because it's a close button, it's going to be a window, and we're going to say local action equals name and setup name. And then we're going to say if type of action equals a function again, then we're going to action the button, and if we don't, we're going to warn and say invalid setup action for this button name, and then we're going to end out, and then there we go. And we have some more functions to go through. So this is the select shop, so the shop item selection toggle. So function setup dot select shop, and then we have the button, again a GUI button, and we say local frame equals button dot parent, and then if currently selected equals this frame, then we're going to tween service, and we're going to create a tween service of the frame with the tween info long, and then we're going to change the size, and then we're going to say OG size, and then we're going to play this tween, and then we're going to set currently selected equal to nil, and then we're going to change this else, the end to else, and say if currently selected, then tween service create currently selected, tween info long, and again we're going to change the size to OG size, and then we're going to play. This shouldn't be comma, should be an equal sign right there. And then outside of this end, we're going to say currently selected equals the frame, and then we're going to do another tween service, create frame, tween info long, and then we're going to set the size again to the selected size, and then we're going to play that. So now when you select the different variables in it, it's going to open up the bottom menu just like a Grow Garden. And now we're going to function setup select, and this is a button again. We're expecting a GUI button, and we're going to say if not button is a GUI button, then we're going to return a warn expected button end. But if is a button, we can continue. So button.maskMomentClick connect function, and we say local name equals button, get attribute window, and then local action equals name and setup select name, and then if type of action equals function in parentheses, then we're going to action the button, and then otherwise we're going to warn once again invalid select action for this name, and then end. And then at the very bottom we want to return setup, and that should be the setup function script done. Alright guys, if you're running into these errors like I am, make sure your studio has access to the API services. What you want to do is come to the top and go to File, Game Settings, Security, Enable Studio Access to API Services, and then we're going to save. And if we rerun, those errors should be gone. There, it's initialized everything, and if we go over to the shop and push E on the attendant, we can open up the menu. We can also click them, and it tweens open the different buy options. So we can buy this until it's out of stock, and it'll properly display that it is out of stock. And then once we wait for it to restock, it should restock them, and then there we go, it's all restocked. Now when we click the buy button, obviously we purchase like we just saw, and if we do the Robux, we can say we're trying to purchase the banana with Robux, and if we try to gift it, we can see we're trying to gift the banana. This is where you would implement your own logic and go on from there. We can also click the restock button and it will restock. Now I don't have a Game Pass set up, so it gives an error here, but it will work once you set the Game Pass up. Now if you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns, please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to join the Discord if you need some code help. There's a lot of good people in there that have been helping out. Now's a good time to mention that only a small percentage of you guys are actually subscribed to my channel, so it'd mean the world to me if you guys subscribe, leave a like. There will be a link in the description to support me on Patreon, where you can also get the Roblox file for this exact place I'm in right now. That's all. Thanks for watching.